2, 1. The Voice of Stockton. For more information on The Voice of Stockton, go to thevoiceofstockton.org.
This is KBCC 89.5 FM, Tracy, California, Peace and Justice Network of San Joaquin.
The views and opinions expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of KXVS The Voice of Stockton or its parents, affiliates, management, and staff.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Live with Kimberly show. I am your guest, not your guest, but your host, Psych, Kimberly Warmsley, here live with you on the Voice of Stockton. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. I am so excited about this month. Happy April. This month, I'm going to be introducing a 5-part trilogy called It's Time to Talk About It. This is stemming from a blog that I did on my Facebook page, Kimberly Warmsley's Therapeutic and Trauma Services, about trauma. And I had such a huge number of questions and people, inquiring what is trauma anyway, that I decided to do a 5-part trilogy. Especially this month, because this month, as a matter of fact, next week is National Crime, it is the Survivor Week campaign. So the Survivor Week campaign is a week-long campaign that's dedicated to survivors of crime. Children, mothers, advocates coming together to talk about what they can do to further advocate this campaign throughout, not only throughout California. This is a countrywide campaign, and so I'm really, really excited to speak upon it. In addition to joining the campaign, I just registered to attend this 4-day conference, Survivors Week, to talk about healing and recovering and what that means. So I'm really, 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 really excited about that. So again, I'm Kimberly Warmsley with Live with The Voice of San Joaquin, and I'm here with Valentino, and
Thank you for having me.
Oh, anytime. So Valentino, I hope that you're ready to talk about it.
Let's do it.
Let's
get into this.
Let's get into this. So let's hone into the dynamics in Stockton and what's going on with healing our community and being transparent with one another. I want to take it back to last week.
Yes.
Last week we had the Stockton Visual hosted by an array of organizations that deal with grief, loss, and trauma.
Yeah.
And so just wanting to kind of spread some light for those who did not attend. What did you think about the event, and how are you feeling now?
The visual was very powerful. It was nice to see, city organizations come together, county organizations come together, such as, Office of Violence Prevention with the City of Stockton, the DA's office going out there with a DA in charge of gangs and stuff like that. For me, it's really important that the community sees these resources are out there to help them. I live out east by Shirley Park, and it's like there's a lot of disconnect. And Stockton is filled with so much trauma because of all the crimes and stuff that have been happening. You think about a crime, and I think about, hey, that's a mother that lost a son or a daughter.
Right.
That's somebody who lost a friend. That's somebody who lost a cousin.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So it's like, now the next step is addressing it. That's the huge thing is, a lot of people don't like to talk about stuff.
Right. Right.
For whatever reason it may be. But once it gets addressed, a solution will be able to come.
And, just taking a side tour from this, yesterday, a rap artist lost his life in Los Angeles, Nipsey Hussle, I think. I hope I'm saying this right. And so you know, one thing that I took away from that visual, and, you know, seeing the mothers and other mothers who were triggered by these series of losses that happened 2 weeks in the community. But when I read that, when I got that Facebook alert that this rapper was shot, now I don't even know this rapper personally. I know that he was a philanthropist in the way of, you know, wanting to give back to the community and stopping violence.
He spoke the truth.
He spoke the truth. He was an
spoke a lot of
entrepreneur.
truth.
But not only that, but he was a father. He was someone's son. He was, you know, like you said earlier, he was a friend. And so that situation, when I got that alert, it took me back. I felt triggered in the sense of just coming from this event and talking about the 5 losses, the 5 lives that were lost over the week, or last week, 2 weeks ago. And so just in that atmosphere and that ambiance of that community center, the gym that we all, you know, came together to pray and talk. It was overwhelming. I found myself up this morning like at 4 and just thinking like, wow, you know, the effects of grief and loss and trauma is significant.
Yes.
And I think that, you know, when these things happen, you get this, you know, overload of people having an opinion, or it's this or it's that, it's this or that.
Yeah.
And then it slowly fades away. But as a therapist and as an organizer, as someone who is in the community and talking about these things, I feel that we can do a lot better in healing and recovery on a long-term perspective.
Yes. Yeah.
And not just a moment. Seeing these families and victims in that audience was just, it was overwhelming.
Yeah, it was overwhelming because, you know, you felt that need for help. You felt
the loss.
Exactly.
You felt the sadness. You felt the grief. You felt, you know, a lot of pain. And so I was just thinking like, whoa, how do we really create safe spaces for individuals who are dealing with this type of trauma to have the long-term effects of healing and recovery? That's a heavy question. It's heavy.
It is, because there's so many different avenues that you can go from, or so many different ways that you can take it on. But, you know, a lot of the time, anybody just wants to be heard.
Yeah.
They just want to be listened to. They just want to feel, you know, somebody's there. They have a shoulder to be on, you know, like a support pillar. And a lot of people in Stockton, you know, I see the narrative changing. A lot of people are opening up their arms to welcome this change.
Right.
To welcome solutions, community-based solutions. You know what I mean?
And I like how you mentioned that shoulder to lean on. I think that it's also important that we talk about not only the cultural element of it, but the subcultural element of it. Especially when a lot of these losses, not all, but some, happen in communities where there's mistrust. And so I know, you know, professionally, the number one thing that they teach us on a professional level is that you have to be where the client is.
Exactly.
You have to be embedded and rooted in their community so that they don't see you as a super staff that, you know, you're going to listen to me and I know all the solutions and I know, you know, how to heal you from this. I think that as professionals, sometimes we have to take a step back in order for them to take a step forward. And then there's that medium where two people can come together and really understand. Because I think that we, as a community and maybe even as a society, have really haven't been as vested in communities that are traumatized as we should. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stockton, it's an amazing place. Back in early 2000s, that's when, all the funk, all the hatred, all the dislike came. And I see Stockton transitioning into a place where it wants to be healed. Just based off of the visual, it was very powerful, once again, to see just everybody come together. It was kind of unexplainable. You just had to have been there.
Right. And I think one of the things that I really want to reiterate is that this is not going to be, the healing piece isn't a one-man show.
No.
It isn't a one-woman show. It is a community process. There is no I in we. There's no I in team.
Yeah.
And I think that there's so much that has happened, that continues to happen, and we don't talk about it enough.
We don't.
One of the things that I took into perspective in that process and in that gymnasium with community and leaders is that sometimes people feel that they're not heard, and there's stigmas about emotional distress and what that means.
Exactly.
And then there's not a lot safe spaces. And so let's talk about what we do on Fridays with the Coffee with Kimberly. I'm so excited to talk about that.
So I join Miss Kimberly Warmsley every Friday morning on 31 South San Joaquin Street, 9:30 to 10:30. Please join us. We have a Coffee with Kimberly session where we just talk about whatever the group wants to talk about. That is one of the safe places where people are able to tend to, people are able to share their emotions, people are able to share what worries them, what creates their trauma. And Kimberly Warmsley does an amazing job at analyzing the conversation and then digging in deeper. And it's nice because everybody talks about it as a group. Everybody has a sense of understanding.
Absolutely. And thank you for those kind words. But I think that the part that I actually love is people who are coming in who are feeling encouraged and inspired and motivated to begin to talk about these conversations.
Yeah, exactly.
The courage to take a stance on your whole, not only spiritual, but your emotional and your mental status is big. Because again, people don't talk about it.
People don't like to talk about it. People don't. And tying into kind of the cultural aspect of it, being from a Latino family, we don't really talk about stuff. We don't really, that's kind of the stigma. We don't, Benojo, like, you don't talk about it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it's just like changing the narrative from that, because especially our youth, talk about environmental trauma.
Absolutely. That's huge. I know we did our first show about environmental trauma. I think that is so significant what you just said. Sometimes, because let me back up real quick. Trauma is anything that you have experienced by hearing, seeing, reading, listening, any type of event that you have endured in your life that has caused you emotional distress. That's trauma.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes on a larger scale, sometimes we forget, when I say we, I mean society, has forgotten that even in communities where they have witnessed a crime, or they have witnessed someone from their community lose their lives. No one ever goes back to that community to say, how are you feeling? What's going on with you? I think that, again, these things happen, these traumas and these losses happen, And then people just keep, we pray about it and we talk about it for a night or two. And then, boom, by next week, that community is still lost.
It's still lost.
That community is still grieving.
It's like an open wound that if it doesn't get treated, it just gets worse over time. And I know a lot of people from, these sub-communities, Conway, Sierra Vista, out east, even out north, where it's like...
Kelly Drive was, some of these, Bianchi, some of these communities that may not have the access. And I'm not saying that, it's just impoverished communities. Sometimes it's also communities that are so far out that, there's transportation issues. Maybe they're not aware. But I just really hope that as we progress, as a community and we become more sophisticated in mental health treatment and healing spaces, that we are looking at those things. Yeah.
It's important because you have to educate these communities, because what they're living and what they're going through is not normal. You know what I mean? And so we have to, a teen having a gun, that's not normal. Seeing somebody get shot in your community is not normal.
And that's not normal to think that it's not normal.
Exactly.
It's like we have to, and that's a paradigm and narrative that we have to change.
Exactly.
I remember I was at an event and an ADA was talking about a case he was working, and he said that the kid, well, it wasn't a kid, it was a young man. The young man was a victim of a fatality in the sense that he was shot. And so, but he made it. He, didn't lose his life. And so he, a couple days later, he goes to see the kid, and he's like, I brought myself a gun. And he was like, why? He was very concerned. And he's like, well, if someone can shoot me, I have to protect myself. Yeah. And he was like, I spent a lot of time talking with him about the consequences of it. But it's like, the kid felt, he was so traumatized from being shot. He felt like this was his only resort of protecting himself. And so.
And that's where city, county needs to come together to provide their resources. Right. And especially when, SPD or whatever law enforcement agency get these cases, there needs to be that follow-up of, hey, is your mental well-being okay? Right. You know what I mean? SPD, they have down to the sergeants, to the chaplains, even to the chief of police. They're expanding on this. I do see them becoming more community-oriented, which is good.
Absolutely. And I think that even going in these communities before a fatality and just talking, I tell parents all the time, when I drive my kids to school or I pick them up, we don't listen to the radio. We just talk. Talk about their day, talk about how they're feeling, what's going on with them. We have become a society where people we just don't talk anymore. We're so embedded in, Facebook and Instagram and this and that and this. What about actually having conversations of talking?
We can't, and also not talking about it enables us to become numb to these traumas. Right. And a lot of people in Stockton are good at developing coping methods to cope with their trauma. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that over a long period of time is not gonna last so long. You know what I mean? Right. Like something can happen to you, and 2 years later, you think you're feeling good, you think you're feeling okay. Right. And then you start seeing that you're acting different, and you're like, why am I acting like this?
Right. And I'm so glad. this is like a question that a lot of people ask about, well, I'm okay. I can't sleep at night. I don't have an appetite. I have nightmares at night. I have flashbacks.
So it's like, what's wrong?
Yeah, they're saying what's wrong.
Obviously, you are not okay.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
What's wrong?
But
and
that's the irony, though, Valentino. That's the irony. People will have those type of symptomologies or signs of trauma and still say, yeah, I have all these things happening to me, but I'm okay.
Yeah, I'm good. Or don't worry about it. I'm all right. You know what I mean?
And that's that part when I always say that it is okay not to be okay. And if you're not okay, then hey, let's talk about it. Like, how can we get you to sleep, have a full night of sleep? Or how do we get you to be at a place where you're not triggered and you're not having like flashbacks?
Yeah. And I want to say something real quick. So if any youth are watching, surround yourself with people who do nothing but embrace you, inspire you, and support your ambitions. That's the first step, because like you said, we get wrapped into Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or any other social media platforms trying to
distract them.
Distract themselves from what's actually going on.
Absolutely.
And if you're not surrounding yourself with those supportive people, then it's like you're only hurting yourself.
Right. And I think that, again, as we are continuing to heal as a community and move forward to recovery and acceptance and not minimizing emotional distress, I think that these are those type of conversations that we need to have, especially for our youth. One thing that I always tell people, especially parents, is to be mindful. Be mindful how you cope with your stresses. Be mindful how you're coping with your trauma and your grief. Because guess what? Your kids are modeling what you are facing and how you're dealing with it, whether you like it or not. So if you're saying that I'm okay and I don't need help and I don't need to talk about my issues or my feelings, guess what your kid is saying in the back of his mind?
The exact same thing.
The exact same thing.
And that, it creates more issues subconsciously in the back of the mind later on when they develop into adulthood, get out of adolescence, and it's like, all right, so this trauma happened to you when you were 16, 12, 13 years old, and now you're a 28-year-old woman or man, and you're trying to get your life together, but you feel some sense of worry, some sense of something happening, but it's like, well, maybe because you haven't talked about what was bothering you, or you haven't really addressed the issue head on.
And what's so interesting about that, so we're talking about things that happen to adolescents, but studies have shown that in the womb, being exposed to domestic violence and fear in the womb can also cause a distress to an embryo. So they come out with, hypervigilant and maybe really, the babies that just flinch really easily, or maybe babies have that flat affect where they're just kind of like, they just have that flat presentation because they have been exposed to violence, which can stem all the way into, conception and being in the mother's womb. So this whole conversation about trauma is so complex. It's so complex.
Because it's like, there's so much trauma.
Yeah.
There's so many different types of trauma that people don't even think is trauma. You know what I mean? And by having these conversations, hopefully that opens somebody's eyes where it's like, hey, this happened to me. Now I'm acting like this, but that's not me. That's not who I am. Dig deep.
Dig deep.
Dig deep.
Dig deep.
Because it's like, those emotions are in there. And if you don't let them out, it's only going to hurt you in the long run. Whether it's hurting you in your personal life or it's hurting you in your professional life.
Absolutely. think, see Valentino, he comes to the group every Friday. He knows.
I try to get real.
He gets real. Look, we get real up in there. But that's a good analogy that I use to kind of really just fine tune it even more so is a volcano.
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes when a volcano erupts, is most of the time it can be predicted,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes it's unpredictable because the pressure of the volcanoes, or it erupts, but to a certain level, just throughout every day, throughout the year.
Exactly.
Right. It's when it gets to the point where the pressure is so intense that volcano erupts.
Exactly.
So we're gonna use that same analogy
Mm-hmm.
with trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So our internal, our feelings and emotions that we hold bottled up inside can erupt.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be like, oh, I'm mad and I'm angry, or I'm sad and I'm depressed, but then you get over it, a couple minutes and it's over.
Yeah.
But as you progress in life and you keep purging those emotions and feelings and thoughts, you internalize that and you bottle that up. You go from being 12 to being 18 to being 24, but now you're 34. And it could be something very minimum.
Yeah.
It could be something very small. It could be something very large. You're triggered. But this time it's not like a small eruption. When you're 31, it's a huge eruption. And now your whole life is distraught.
So it's better to get it done and over with right then and there.
Come through, Valentino.
Right then and there.
That's right.
I want to share a story real quick. So my previous employer, the job ended.
Yeah.
And so I was without a job for 3 months, right? So I was bottling up those emotions of stress and anxiety and not knowing what to do or what's my next move going to be. And so I knew in my mind that, hey, I need to address this to my parents. I'm feeling some type of way. I'm not acting like myself. I'm not eating. I can't sleep. I'm losing weight. People are asking what's wrong with me.
Right.
And so once I had that conversation with my parents, they were able to, guide me and address certain issues. And so it's like, imagine if I didn't do that. Where would I be right now?
Right.
I would still be in the same boat.
Absolutely. With those emotions and those feelings still bottled up inside you. And so what Valentino is describing, so I'm going to describe it more in more of a therapeutic fashion. So those 3 months of emotions and feelings that you had bottled up, it was a slow release because you externalized it. So externalizing is that release of what you have internally, and you did that by talking.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then once you started talking, that was that slow release of those emotions and feelings. And then, therefore, you felt better.
I did.
You felt better.
I felt relieved afterwards because I was like, those 3 months were just, it was like almost like torture because I was just like, I don't know what to do. I have so much anxiety, so much stress. I'm like, what's going on? I never acted like this before. I'm on Google seeing if anybody else feels like this. I'm like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And see, that's a piece where sometimes the narrative that has been dictated to society is that we don't do that. We don't talk about it, that we keep going and we stay strong and we move forward. But sometimes you have to take a step back and do some inventory about how you feel. It's huge.
It's a huge part of, well, first you have to be comfortable with yourself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I wasn't comfortable with myself because I was feeling awkward. Like, why was I feeling like this? Like, I feel super awkward trying to express my emotions. I don't want to seem weak.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's
all that distorted thoughts, right? Like our mind starts trying to justify the fact that we don't feel okay. But I do want to touch on something that just really resonated in my heart. Because sometimes, you and I and maybe more people in the community have an actual resource and have an actual outlet. I'm concerned about those who do not have an outlet,
True.
who do not have, parents who are available or even understanding of things that they're going through. And so that is a very difficult, pill to swallow, but it's the reality that we need to build more safe spaces with safe people who kids can come and talk to. And or at the same time building the parents up who may not understand that when they're not listening or affording their children opportunities to talk about their issues, the consequences of that. I think that we don't talk about that enough either.
Exactly.
So
it's just, and also it's like a trusting as well. You know what I mean? Because it's like people in communities, they major thing is, can I trust you? You know what I mean? It's like, are you gonna go behind my back and tell the cops?
Yeah.
And so that's something that I always do with Stockton Crime Stoppers, because it's like, I don't know how anybody else feels, but if somebody I cared about passed away and somebody had a tip about it, I would want that person to report that immediately.
Absolutely.
And so we have to start by going into the community and start identifying, why don't you trust this? What was the harm that this has done to you?
And I think that also taking time to build that trust as well, because trust is not given, trust is earned.
Yes.
Especially in communities where there are frictions and or mistrust from whatever the reason is. Many people have different reasoning why they don't trust law enforcement. And I think that Stockton's law enforcement as an organization has done really good at trying to build that trust and go into these communities and develop that trust. However, there's a lot of work that still needs to get done.
Like you said, it's a community effort.
And it's a community effort. Invite them to your functions and your events when you have them, and take the time to speak with them.
Exactly. Like if you're in charge of a board, if you're a part of a nonprofit, a business, are you taking that initiative to reach out to these communities? Are you extending that invitation? Because sometimes that's all it takes.
And remember that we are control of the narrative, so we cannot limit it. Well, before we end today, I do want to take some time and talk about a tournament. So this was supposed to be my guests today, but they weren't able to make it. So got this flyer. I think this is super duper 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 cool. It's the Foster Grandparent Program 2019 Golf Scramble. So this is going to take place at the Oakmore Golf Course on Saturday, April 13th at 3737 North Wilson Way. And what I'm really excited about, Valentino, on this actual program is that all the proceeds that are collected for this program is going to be donated to victims of violent crimes and Stockton's very own Kelly's Angels Foundation.
Wow, that's amazing, because it's
right?
Like, it's much needed. The wonders of what these organizations like Kelly's Angels do is just a positive impact on the community, and it's time to expand on that.
Absolutely.
It really is.
Absolutely. So this morning I did some research on what the foundation means, and what their mission and their vision and their objectives are. And so I was very impressed. So this foundation was stemmed upon the passing of a loved one who was a victim of a tragic loss. And so I talked to her mother this morning about the situation, she was so excited about this tournament and the proceeds going back to the foundation, because this foundation emphasizes on victims.
Wow. Yeah.
So if, victims, the family of the victims who, maybe have tragically lost their lives, can get an abundance of services, from counseling to tutoring to, therapy. I know that they do a lot of craft fees, a lot of programs for Halloween. Like the give back and the abundance of love that they give back to the community is so overwhelming. And so getting this information about this tournament and, what they plan to do with the proceeds was it's outstanding.
Yeah. It's just wonders what these events can do for the community, because it's that community building. Everybody's there in the same room, everybody's chopping it up, having a good time, bouncing happiness off of each other, nothing but support. So it's really good vibes when you attend these events. So bring a friend. And what I really was impressed about as well, being a survivor, this is why I was up early this morning, right? I was up thinking about this because, again, the death of the rapper, and then the 5 losses that we endured 2 weeks ago, and the visual, this is all making me feel a certain way, just to be perfectly transparent. And so I say that to say this. I was wrestling between someone being called a survivor and being called a victim. And I felt like when people use the term survivor, it's, yes, this tragedy has happened and I have endured and experienced this loss. However, I'm turning my pain into power. Exactly.
And I'm doing that by formating these foundations and organizations that work towards empathizing with other families who have experienced similar or the same type of tragedies, and they're turning their pain to power. One thing that was so impressionable last Thursday at the visual is seeing other mothers come together to support the mothers and children of the families that experienced the loss.
That was interesting because I've never seen anything like that before. Like you said, where other mothers who've lost, a child, they came to this visual to be there with the mothers who lost their child in this weekend, in this past weekend of violent events. And so that being a survivor and turning your pain into something that can help other people solve their pain, it's very, very powerful.
It's extremely powerful. And I think that one thing that I've learned about loss, and this is a personal perspective, not a professional perspective, is that you never are at 100% of acceptance of the loss of that loved one. However, through time, therapy, having supportive partners, you're able to cope with it.
Exactly.
You're able to kind of deal with the fact that that person is no longer here. But you're never going to completely, forget about it.
No.
But having opportunities to have a little less pain than yesterday, than that of today is progress. And so, again, thinking about the proceeds and how the proceeds will be giving back to community members who have been affected through challenges of loss is significant. Like we said earlier in the show, Valentino, there's not enough places.
There's not.
There's not enough spaces.
There's not. And it's like, we have to get comfortable, once again, with ourselves. We have to get comfortable with talking about it. Those are the two most important things, because if you're not comfortable with yourself, then how do you expect treatment or solutions to come your way? You know what I mean? Because if you're not comfortable, how can you project that? How do you know how you really feel?
Right.
Because you've just been bottling up, coping with it,
Right.
lying to yourself.
And I also firmly believe that community-based programs
Yes.
like Kelly's Angels,
Yes.
like El Concilio,
Yes.
like Mary Magdalene,
Yep.
those community agencies need to be at the forefront, along with, Office of Violence, Crime, and
Yes.
Prevention,
Yes.
and our law enforcement and our community leaders,
Yes.
so that we understand what is actually needed in the community.
Exactly.
It's so important.
Yeah. And something to the providers, to the organizations, to the nonprofits, the businesses, whoever provides these types of services, it is time to go into the communities that are disconnected, because it is amazing to have a platform to say that you provide these services, but it's like, if you're not tapping into those communities, you're just wasting your time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so vital, because again, that goes back to developing that trust and that rapport and that relationships. For me, as a organizer who's in the trenches, I totally understand. If your heels of your shoes, if the rubber on your heels of your shoes is not off your shoes, then you need to do a better job, because that means you're not walking these streets.
Exactly.
And people need to see you, and people appreciate you.
Yeah.
There's so many times that I'm like in the store, like, oh my God, are you Kimberly? Oh, it's so good to see you. Keep writing those blogs.
Yeah.
Keep talking about it, because we that's empowering to me. It's a great feeling to have.
Yeah, and it's like, that helps people. It truly does.
Yes.
Like, going back to me going to Google to see if anybody else felt like the way I was feeling. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You try to, when something happens, I try to see, anybody else feel like this, or, you know what I mean?
Right. Because Google just knows all the answers. Right. we Google first before we do anything. But it's real, and I think that hopefully, my vision, especially at the end, I felt like it was really important to have those agencies there.
It was.
For the community,
It was.
to have that time to network.
Yeah.
And so those very same individuals from that very same community where the trauma happened, where the trauma occurred, they know what agencies are available.
Exactly.
How to access support. So in lieu of Survivors Week, like I said, this will be a 5-part trilogy. And
get ready, y'all.
Yeah, get ready.
ready. Because
we're about to dig real deep.
Yeah. And I wanna note something. If you don't feel uncomfortable in a conversation, then it's not a real conversation. Because it's like, you have to feel uncomfortable to feel that change.
Yeah.
You have to feel uncomfortable to see that
difference
of opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So just wanting to remind everyone that the Voice of San Joaquin is always looking for donations. We are also a nonprofit as well. And so in order for this station to provide the information and news and insight to the community, we do operate on a nonprofit budget. So if you have it in your heart, please give us a donation, call the station and work that out. Also wanting to give a shout out to Stockton's very own Mr. Valentino Silva in the building. Always prepared.
It's a pleasure.
Always ready. He stays ready.
Yeah, have to. Have to. No other way.
Right. 2019 is no game.
Nope.
And also wanting to continue to invite the community to conversations with Kimberly at 31 North San Joaquin Street, Stockton, California, 95202. I'm available free of service, free of charge. Even have some nice cupcakes. They're good, aren't they good?
And some
Valentino?
good coffee.
Oh, yeah. Some good coffee. Every Friday from 9 to 10:30, I provide the treats. You provide the coffee. Also, please feel free if you have any questions about what I do as a therapist, please go to my website at www.kwtts.com. Thank you. This is going to complete part 1 of our 5-part trilogy. Oof. You have to stay tuned for next week. It's going to be even more indebted in trauma and recovery and grief and loss. Listen, it's time to talk about it. Thank you. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Thank you again, Valentino.
No problem. Thank you, Kimberly.